Welcome to the Clean Power Hour. I'm your co-host, Tim Montague, joined by my other co-host, John Weaver. Welcome to the Clean Power Hour, John.
Hey, Tim. How you doing this week? Hope your Illinois travels are going well for you this week.
Yes, I'm coming to you live from Central Illinois, and you are coming to us from somewhere in Massachusetts. Where do you live?
New Bedford, Massachusetts, the city that Moby Dick was written on, right down on the coast by the Cape. It's a great summertime vacation, except today there is thunder, a little bit of. I haven't seen the lightning, but I heard it, and very humid up on the roofs right now up in the Northeast. We've been coming in super early, 5, 6 a.m., leaving around 1, 2 p.m. before it gets too hot, before the heat builds up. But it's nice summer anyway in New England. We like it.
Yeah, we've been having a nice summer here in the Midwest too. Some very hot, humid days, but many, 70s and 80s, and a lot of good outdoor weather. So good construction weather. Not too much rain. We had a rainy June, but July has been less so. And as I say to my developer friends, winter is coming. So please send us your 90% plans as soon as possible. Today, we're going to talk about the early stages of developing a solar project for our commercial industrial project owners. We're going to talk about some news, the Biden Clean Economy Plan, the FERC Order 841 news, that is regarding battery storage and the grid. We're going to talk about a new tool for solar O&M finance that NREL has published, which you've done a story on, and then the Massachusetts going 100% clean power plan. How is it that you refer to the Massachusetts clean power plan anyway? What is the lingo?
Well, I mean, first off, technically, Massachusetts, they just have a 100% clean energy bill submitted. Technically, the state doesn't have a 100% plan right now. They have a few versions submitted. The one that I wrote about specifically was actually submitted in January of 2019. So I'm just calling it 100% clean energy goals right now. There's no specific plan. We have multiple other programs. We have a solar incentive program that's called SMART. We have a clean peak standard, which is specifically aiming to tap out dirty and expensive electricity, and a lot of other different programs, but we don't have a statewide 100% clean. They have some goals to get to clean, 80% clean, but no 100% yet. So I'm not going to give it a nickname until it gets to 100%. Has to earn that nickname.
So the RPS, the Renewable Portfolio Standard, is what in Massachusetts?
I believe it's roughly 80% by 2050, and it increases like 1 to 2% per year. So it's really just an incremental growth program that we have officially legislated right now.
Yeah. We have a 25% by 2025 plan here in Illinois. We're falling short of that, unfortunately. We might get to 10% unless we get new legislation. We do have new legislation in the works. So anyone working in solar or having a facility that they want to solarize in Illinois, just know that there are more incentives in the works. And we have what's called the Future Energy Jobs Act, which was the foundation for some really nice incentives that came out in 2019. And now we're seeing a major pulse of construction. What that looks like for us, John, is last year we did 17 megawatts of rooftop solar. This year we're going to do upwards of 30 megawatts. We're almost doubling year over year. So it's a major upward tick, but unless we get new legislation, there will be a down in 2021. And so these, here in the Midwest, we're completely dependent on really good incentives that are a part of legislation. It's less dependent on that. The solar industry is less dependent on that in other places. I don't know how you feel about the Massachusetts market or other Northeast markets.
Well, Massachusetts has some of the highest labor costs in the nation, and we have electrician ratios. So you have to have, when we're doing electrical work, you always have to have a certain number of electricians on the roof, and those are highly skilled, highly paid individuals. We have, 30% less sunlight than the southwest of the U.S. So, but we do have very expensive electricity. So it's, it's a little mix. So, I mean, but the key thing is if we want to accelerate deployment of clean electricity, not just build economically viable solar, if we want to accelerate it and transition, we have no choice. We have to incentivize it because gas and coal are cheap. And our goal isn't just to compete with gas and coal. It's to remove the gas and the coal. So the incentives are going to be needed until there's no gas and coal. That's really, in my opinion, how the argument should be structured.
So under the incentives that you have today, how does this solar project ROI for a commercial industrial project owner? What is the payback period, for example?
It varies. In Mass, with a nice behind the meter on a large roof where I can break 300, 400, we can squeeze it under 5 years if there's no major, interconnection upgrades, if there's nothing, about to do a big transformer, if the transformer work is small, if the with the solar alone, I can get down, stay under $2. If you have a tough roof where I have a lot of attachments or it gets a little more complex, we'll push over 5 years. But I try really, really hard to keep it around the 5-year mark and, push the customer in different ways, maybe cut back somewhere there, use a better priced panel, whatever I can. 5 years is what I really, really push for. And luckily the numbers give me an opportunity, the incentives, tax credits, depreciation, all that stuff comes together, and that's my aim. 5 years, good solid swing right there, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm always trying to keep the ROI to 4 to 6 years here in Illinois with the incentives that we have, and that's why these incentives were such a game changer. Before we had renewable energy credits in the market here in Illinois, the payback period was 10 plus years. Ironically, in mature markets like California, the payback period is often 8, 9, even 10 years. But solar has gone mainstream there. They also have legislation that, for example, all new residential construction requires solar power on the roof. And so that is also driving the implementation of solar. But, we are such social animals, and we are herding animals. And so here in the Midwest, the greatest barrier to entry is that people don't know what solar is. They don't see it. They're just starting to see it, on residential projects. This year, 111 community solar projects are getting built. So we'll start to see all those 10 and 20 acre solar farms around the state. And then next year, some big kahuna utility scale projects are going to get built, some 100 and 200 megawatt projects. These are, anywhere from 600 acres to 1,500 acre projects. But let's talk a little bit before we go into the news, John.
Yeah.
Let's talk about one of the first steps in commercial industrial solar, which is the site evaluation. Let's say I've got a commercial building. It could be office, it could be industrial, and it's got a good flat roof with relatively few obstructions. What are some of the things that you are asking the facility owner about at the very early stages of a project?
Yeah, I mean, walking into a site, the first thing I'm always doing, even as I approach the site, I'm in my car, I'm already looking at power lines. I'm just looking at the lines that are coming into the building. I want to make sure I can pick up the transformer or the exact pole that's coming into the building so I can see the power lines that are coming in. Make sure we have some 3-phase lines. Get a feel for the size of the transformer that's feeding the site. Got to know where that transformer is because I'm possibly going to have to run some wires to it. That first electrical gear is the first thing I start looking at. Where is that meter maybe on the outside of the building? Where is the meter going to be on the inside of the building if it's on the inside? Because That's just step number one. That's the easiest thing for me to see and think about. And oftentimes, since I show up 5 or 10 minutes early and I don't want to sit in my car because I've already been sitting on my butt for 20, 30 minutes, an hour on the way there, I need to get up and stretch, get the blood flowing. And so, I pull out my camera and I just start circling the building. And, you got the commercial solar guy hat, so they don't think you're a police officer or, somebody scoping the place to come back later. And that's my step number one, is to just circle the building, figure out where I'm going to park my shipping container, where my electricity is coming in. Step number one is for me.
Well, you're assuming that you're going to do a construction project. I'm not assuming that in this evaluation. One of the first things I ask a facility owner about is the age of their roof, because we have a rule of thumb in rooftop solar, in commercial rooftop solar, that you want your roof to be 10 years old or younger, not older than 10 years. And the reason for that is that the solar is going to be up there for 25 years. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to have to tear off the solar array. That's quite expensive. You can do it, of course, to do a re-roofing. But I like to say, and this isn't, I don't like to say this, but I say this, and that is that old roofs are the bane of my existence. Because let's face it, a decade goes by quickly. Once you've re-roofed, right, your roof gets 10 years old very quickly. Unless it's leaking, you forget about your roof, right? If your roof is functioning, you don't really pay any attention to it for the most part. Maybe you're doing some maintenance on the rooftop units, on the AC units that are typically up there, but if it's not leaking, you're not worrying about it. But anyway, and sometimes customers want to do a re-roof, and that's great, and we can talk about that. But so the age of the roof is one of the first questions. Then I'm also trying to secure the power bills and do a high-level analysis, right, from my desktop of what the solar could do, how much of the energy it could offset. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, the re-roof work is always a challenge. I'm in the Northeast, so I have a lot of older construction, and some of these roofs have layers and layers and layers upon each other and different roofing products over the years. I have a project that I'm working on right now. We're building in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and we took core samples to see the depth of the roofing materials. And we took like 40 of them because it's a big project, and they have different sections of the roof that are very different from each other. And they were patched up and worked at different paces over the years. And then at some point, the building fell into disrepair. A new investor bought it, and now they're taking care of it. And so we take these core samples, and we're happy with what we're finding. We have nice consistent data across various places, and so we choose a combination of 5-inch screws and 7-inch screws to attach our flashing to the structure. And because this is an older roof, it doesn't have a lot of weight, a lot of available collateral load. So we can only put 3-4 PSF on it. So we're going to hard attach. And we start putting in screws. We're putting in 1,000 in this site. And 2 chunks of the building, we got screws coming through the ceiling. And try to find out why, and it turns out that half the roof had 3 or 4 layers of roofing material, and other chunks of the roof only had 1 or 2 layers of roofing material. And each of those layers are, 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch, and suddenly you got 30 or 40 screws coming through a roof. And so that roofing work, it's always a challenge. My next project that I'm working on in that similar area, the customer needs a new roof. He's got leaks all over, and he's got an old metal roof from the late 90s. And he's been repairing it. He's like, John, I need a new roof, and I got to do it with the solar. And in this case, he's literally getting the roof as we do the solar, and we get a great benefit. We get the roofer to do the final seals on our attachments to the roof so that the roofer will warrant for the full lifetime of the roof, the attachments. And this means that if there's a leak, the customer who's used to a roofer warranting roof stuff gets a roof warranty. And that's a great sale because I don't have to be the solar guy who's warranting a roof. I'm working in coordination with the roof. We're putting a we got a metal roof, and we're putting some wood in between the layers so we get a nice flat surface. Then we're going to attach our stands, and then we're going to do a white TPO over the whole surface, a white plastic roof over it. And our hard attachments to the roof will be underneath that TPO. And so that's really nice. It's a nice clean attachment. Everything's warranted there. And so in that case, it worked out nice. Business customers who have a roof between the ages of 10 to like 16 years, 10 to 15 years, it's too soon to replace that roof because they got 10 more years, 15 more years of roof life.
Yes, they do.
But it's a little late to put a solar on it. So it's like you don't want it too old, but you don't want it too young. You want it like right in this middle.
Well, young is good.
You don't want it in the middle sweet spot. You want it old or you want it young. You want an extreme roof age, and so there's a dynamic there. But one tool that I found, it's a Jedi mind trick that I do on myself, and I pitch it to the customer, and the customers always laugh, and I say, listen, every other time you get a roof, you're just paying some cash, and then you got a roof. But now, go to your banker and get a roof plus a solar loan. Combine them together. And yes, your ROI is going to be a little bit slower, but when's the last time your roof paid for itself? This will be the only time. And yeah, it's a 10-year payback, but no other roof in your entire life has ever had a payback. So, you got to cajole.
Let's talk about that, though.
Yeah.
When you combine roofing and solar, I think what you're referring to is that the owner can now use the tax incentives, the investment tax credit, on the solar portion of the roof and deduct some big portion of the roofing costs from
I definitely don't push that. No. I'm actually the other opposite. The only time that I see roofing material included in this tax credit and any of the tax benefits is when the roofing material is required as part of the solar. If you're just combining a new roof with new solar, the benefit is that they're in the same loan. But you can't apply if, per my reading of the IRS, here's where you get the solar guy caveat. We're not tax professionals. Please seek out your own tax professional. But
absolutely.
Yeah, I never include the roof with the solar tax incentive, only when it's
make a
structural.
solar roof. So the trick to this is I've worked with a customer through a project where they did this. You have to make it a fully attached solar array, okay? So that the roof is not just any old roof. It's a roof with an attached solar array, so it's a solar roof. But okay, so taking a loan and combining it, I don't know that that's really making the roof pay for itself. They're still paying the loan.
Jedi mind trick. Mind trick.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. But let's talk about the energy piece. The energy piece is very important too, because that tells us what they're paying for power. Mm-hmm. It allows us to model a solar project cash flow, and because solar offsets the energy supply for the most part, it will impact other charges like demand charges, but only subtly. Mm-hmm. It's truly the kWh charges that solar is offsetting, and that kind of makes sense because the solar array is producing kWh, and so that's one of the tricks of the trade. I see some solar installers just taking an average. They take the entire energy bill divided by the kWh and say, oh, you're paying 10 cents per kWh. No, actually, their supply charge is some fraction of that. They might be paying here in the Midwest 4 to 7 cents for commercial industrial grid power. And that's what you can offset. So, but then the sizing is a factor too. I mean, I always try to get to 100%. How do you size your commercial projects?
I max out the roof. In Massachusetts, in Rhode Island, we have a few incentive sizes that also affect the logic. We also look at the size of the bill. There's different variables with each site that kind of drives how I like to size things. The way I start every analysis, though, is that I send the roof directly to engineering and I say max out the roof. And then once I get it back and I then do my financial analysis of the site, that's when I start to make my judgment calls about where I want the system to be sized based upon what I think the customer is most likely to take.
See, we have specific rules about net metering that don't allow us to just max it out. So we can only produce up to 100% of the on-site power with a solar array. We cannot exceed that by more than 10%. So if I have enough roof to size a system to generate 100%, I will do that, or maybe go to 105%, because the array is going to degrade. This is semiconductor technology that's sitting out there in the sun, baking day in and day out, and it degrades by about 0.5% per year. So at the end of 20 years, you're at 80% plus of what you were on day one, but you're at a lower value. And oftentimes the facility, we do a lot of manufacturing, for example. These are facilities that are running 24/7 oftentimes. And while we can offset a large percentage, we often can't offset 100% of their load. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. Sometimes we can only offset a small percentage. I'm working with a chemical factory now where we can only offset 3% of their load with a 2 megawatt AC array. And we also have rules about 2 megawatt AC is the largest solar project we can do for behind the meter here in Illinois. And that's 2.5 or 2.8 megawatts DC. So approaching 3 megawatts DC. So those are the largest behind the meter solar projects that we see typically. You know, of course there are, through virtual net metering, you know, like the Facebooks and Googles and Amazons of the world are buying virtual PPAs with solar farms and wind farms. And then they're buying tens of megawatts or gigawatts of power because their appetite for power is ginormous with all the data centers that they're running.
I just read about what might be the world's largest single project PPA signing, and I think it was a wind farm. So this is a little bit further from our specialties, but it's an offshore wind farm in the 900 megawatt range off the coast of feeding into Taiwan. And I just thought that was pretty cool. It was two sub projects of the same wind farm, and you know, Taiwan is actually building an entire offshore power grid that just surrounds the island so that they can slowly deploy wind, which is pretty cool. So you're talking about like the Googs and the Facebooks buying huge volumes, you know, hundreds of megawatts of projects get purchased here. I mean, in the United States, it's double digits of gigawatts of corporate power purchase agreements per year nowadays of various sizings, with some of these behind the meter, some of these, you know, all over. Lots of corporate purchasing of solar going on these days, which is obviously good for us commercial people.
Yep. So as far as early site evaluation, what else? You mentioned the electrical infrastructure. Of course, we want to visit the electrical closet and take photographs of all that gear that we might be interconnecting into. We'll take photographs of the roof because that's where we're going to be laying out the solar, or the field next to the facility. If you have ground next to a facility, ground mount works great as well.
Mm-hmm. Structural matters a lot. You know, a lot of buildings, we got to figure out the available, you know, in the Northeast here, I have a lot of snow. So we have a snow load requirement that ranges from 20 to 30 pounds per square foot of that has to be available. The structure has to be able to hold 20 to 25 pounds of snow. And then on top of that, we need to add anywhere from 3 to 7 pounds for the solar. And so we have to do a structural analysis with every single site up here, and being conscious of how that building is built is very important. Well, you know, once I walk into a structure on the inside, immediately my head goes up. I start looking at the beams. I start looking at the purlins, start to see, you know, how things are supported. I start to look how much stuff is hanging from the roof, because all of that's going to go in. You know, we have to do a lot of measurements. We have to understand everything that's putting force on these structures. And that's going to go to a structural engineer who's going to do some math and going to say, okay, guys, you have X PSF. We have to either upgrade it or downgrade it. And sometimes it gets close. A project I'm working on in Bristol right now, 4 months ago, we had a structural engineer show up. They did their first rough analysis, and they said we had available 1.75 PSF. Now, that's a tight number because my solar is going to be at least 3, and my new roof is going to be at least 0.6 or so. So now we're at to like 3.6 PSF. And told the engineer what we were doing. He gave us those rough numbers. We said, okay, this is what we're going to try and build, and we're going to upgrade the structure a little bit. And so the engineer said, well, tell me what your live data is, your real numbers. And we delivered engineering. After the real data was delivered, the structural engineer went back and redid everything and said, okay, based upon these numbers, you actually do have enough structural capacity to hold this. Only if you spread the panels out very far and do this and this and this. And so, it's a nuance. It's hard work to figure out the math of that structural. And so for me, I always care about the structural because I'm an optimist of a sales guy. I'm closing every deal. And just got to believe that. And so with that, I care about talking about the structural and actually what's going on in the local power grid because I'm in a region with a lot of solar installed. Massachusetts got over 10% of its electricity from solar. And I have a lot of projects that come back with grid upgrade requirements or just substations that have many projects in line before me, before we can even consider running the numbers. So, structural is important. Obviously, doing the spreadsheet is fundamental. Knowing the roof age matters. But another thing I like to do before I visit the site, I'll do a one-page report looking at the local interconnection. We have tools to show roughly the status of the local substation and the local feeder lines. Tells us how much solar is installed, tells us how much electricity demand is on those systems. So we can get a rough idea what the power grid engineers are going to see. And I show up and I say, no, customer, there's 2 megs of solar already on the substation and there's 150 kW on your feeder. So we should be good because this is we can fit 10 megs on the feeder and 40 megs on the substation. I try to know that one because, every project, your financial matters first, of course. Can the customer absorb the taxes? The roof matters. But if the grid's going to charge an upgrade of $500,000, that's going to significantly affect things. All those things are running through my head as I show up with my first site visit, understanding this broad picture of 5, 6, 7, 10 variables.
Yep. All right. So for facility owners, you have to think about the age of your roof. You need to think about the structural of the roof. That will eventually need to be evaluated by a structural engineer. And you want to think about some of your other infrastructure, access to the grid, how much renewables are on the grid. But that's why we solar installers are in business. We can help you. So you need to find a qualified installer and have them help you with that analysis. John, let's dive into some other stories. What would you like to talk about first? We have some good stories.
Well, I'd really like to chat about this new spreadsheet, operations and maintenance spreadsheet that NREL put out. National Renewable Energy Lab. They're managed by the U.S. Department of Energy. They have a couple of teams based out in Colorado. I've been to their facility in Golden, Colorado before. It was really like fantasy land, just hanging out with PhDs who just talk solar power all day long and all research. It's just hanging out with the smartest people on earth. It was really great. Totally enjoyed it. But they put out some new research, and the new research, there it is up on the screen. The document they put out was specifically to build a spreadsheet that allows you to predict your operations and maintenance costs going 20 years, 30 years into the future. And not only did the document, so first off, the report they put out, so they put out a PDF, 15, 20 pages, And that document gives a little bit of history first on O&M costs and how they've evolved. And then it goes into a statistical description of why and how they model failure rates. So it's not just saying, okay, your inverter is going to fail on year 15. No. It's much more in depth. It's okay, the probability of an inverter failing in any year of 20 years is this number, and there's a bathtub curve. And so for the first year, the probabilities are high. But then once they get moving, the probabilities drop and they stay low and slowly increase. And then there's this analysis and there's these fixed costs. So it's a scientific O&M spreadsheet that really delves into great data. And they look at other data for predicting the failure rate. So it's not just saying, okay, the O&M or the manufacturer suggests the module will die and here's the warranty. No. They looked at another national laboratory, the Sandia National Laboratory Group, who has an online tool where they tracked many years of solar O&M costs, of failure rates across multiple components, many manufacturers of modules, of inverters, and then they pull all this data into this tool. And so this spreadsheet that's embedded in this PDF, which I linked to right there, that document has a back end of all kinds of databases. And if you just plug in your project variables, residential, commercial, and utility, it's gonna spit out an annual O&M cost. So they say this is what we think every year is gonna be what's gonna fail. And then the next section is that they do a net present value on it. And so it says, okay, in real money terms, accounting for inflation, accounting for all these different changes, price decreases of panels, price decreases, how much money are you going to need in the future? And it lets you compare the cost of one inverter's full lifetime cost versus another. The example they use is that some inverters are cheap up front, but need a lot of O&M, whereas other inverters cost a lot up front, but they can kind of sit around for a while. And then the last section, it's a tool to help you predict the exact amount of cash you need on hand to cover all of these costs, so that you can say, okay, I'm building a 10 megawatt plant. Here's the pieces we think are going to fail. Here's the work we think is going to be necessary. And Mr. Banker, please finance me. And here's my projected schedule of costs going forward. And that lets the banker put together a credit line so that you can say, hey, here's, we're expecting this amount of money to be spent. We're expecting truck rolls, cleanings, this, and this. And it's really just a nice document for somebody who wants to own a project, or even a customer, to give them just a little more in depth about what might occur. And, O&M is growing. Wood Mackenzie put out a report that says globally O&M will be a roughly $10 billion business by the year 2025. And this year alone, with replacements and everything, inverters alone will be $1 billion O&M business. That's not even new inverters. That's just inverter replacements, inverter upgrades, inverter repairs. And
let's talk about the components. So a solar array consists of solar panels, the black panels that are out there. You see them on tilted roofs because you can see them. On most commercial roofs, you can't see them because they're above eye level. But then you've got the racking, which is just metal of various shapes and sizes that's holding the solar panels onto the roof. That whole system is then either ballasted with bricks or attached with anchors to the roof, and then pipe and wire running to the inverters that you've been referring to, which are converting the DC. The solar panels produce DC power. Those then the DC power runs in wires to the inverters. The inverters are converting that to AC, which is what the grid uses, which is what most of the equipment in your facility uses. And those inverters are doing heavy lifting. And those are suitcase-sized pieces of equipment of various sizes depending on the scale of the project, but from a small suitcase, like a carry-on suitcase, to a large suitcase. And those inverters, because they are doing the heavy lifting, right, John, they don't last forever.
Correct.
And you mentioned the bathtub curve. What do you mean by the bathtub curve?
So the bathtub curve is a way of describing hardware failure rates. And with power electronics, apparently, we're real good at making things that last a real long time. But reality is, with the way hardware moves from a factory, with the way things are manufactured, maybe the rough handling of installation, failure rates are higher in day one through, say, the end of the first year is the rough rule of thumb that the solar industry uses. But then after the system kind of shakes in and gets everything, we figure out what our voltages is, we figure out what our fuse sizes are, we get the hardware running for a year, we shake the modules, we get them installed. After that first year, the failure rate goes low. So you have this curve where it looks kind of like a bathtub on one side, where it drops down, and because in year one it's high, 10 items fail per site, and then it drops down after that first chunk, and it flattens out for a while. However, as the project ages, failure rates start to increase again, and then somewhere in the double-digit years, the failure rates start to creep up, and so you end up with a peak in the beginning, a drop, and then a flat area, and then as it gets toward the end, it starts to climb up again, and you have a bathtub. And that's, from an operations and maintenance standpoint, that's the way it works. So sometimes new cars have the same thing. You got 2 or 3 little weird things you got to get fixed at the shop. They'll fix it right away. You're still in that 1 year, 2 year, everything shiny warranty, and then for the next few years, it's great, and then toward the end, you got to start thinking about getting a new car. With solar, similar. And, what we'll start doing soon, but not yet in the United States because we're early, pretty soon we're going to start doing repowering around year 10, year 20. We're going to upgrade those solar plants, and they'll end up lasting 30, 40, 50 years with strategic key operations and maintenance actions paying attention to it. And that's why I'm really interested about this report. The operations and maintenance business alone, it's going to be giant. And the report noted that 90% of solar power has been installed in the last 7 years. And these are projects that have 20, 25, 35-year lifetimes. So 90% is 1/4 of its life old. And probably 50% 2-3 years old. So it's, we're still early. This is going to be a whole industry separate from building solar, separate from owning solar, separate from making components. It's a whole new big industry that is going to be worth billions and billions of dollars.
So here's our O&M page. We are ramping up our operations and maintenance on solar arrays because there's so much solar being installed in Illinois now. And I'll just quickly run through some of the components of what we cover. Active monitoring and proactive response. In other words, we will watch your array and monitor if it's producing normally based on how the weather has been. We'll do an annual preventative maintenance visit, checking all the connections, checking all the wiring, making sure that everything is functioning as it should. Condition-based maintenance, if something breaks, if a panel flies off or cracks and needs to be replaced, we will come in and do that. Performance evaluation, we're doing a lot of performance evaluation on systems installed by others also now. Mm-hmm. And so you just never know until you have a professional evaluate your system if it's producing as much electricity as it should. So that's always a good thing. Independent system commissioning, we've started doing that for others as well. Every time a system is commissioned or turned on, basically, right, you're handing it over. The solar installer installs it. You get permission from the grid operator to flip the switch and turn it on. And just prior to that, you want to have a commissioning where an engineer and a technician evaluate the entire installation and make sure that it's safe and sound and fully functional. Dealing with warranties, of course, every piece of solar equipment for the major equipment comes with a warranty. Solar panels, for example, often will have a 20-year production warranty or 25-year production warranty. Module soiling analysis. If you're in a dusty area, of course, that doesn't get a lot of rain, then soiling can be a factor. Here in the Midwest, soiling can be a factor. You just need to do a good rinsing once a year. And then on ground mounts, vegetation management. I just recorded a episode on robotic vegetation management, which will be dropping in a couple of weeks. So as we're building these, thousands of acres of solar farms, all of those need to be maintained. And then emergency response. Here at Continental, we have a fleet of trucks that we can roll 24/7. And so if there's some pressing emergency with your solar facility, we can get to it in a timely manner and help you out. So yes, the O&M opportunity is big, John, and we are going hard after that. So for all of those developers and solar project owners out there, please give us a call. We want to help you with your solar O&M here in the Midwest, or in your case, John, in Massachusetts, Rhode Island. Are you looking at O&M on many projects right now?
So my company, Commercial Solar Guy, we're not chasing O&M. We are coordinating O&M with a few groups around us who specialize in it, who focus it. They have a program in place of varying support. I pitch 3 types of O&M. The first is if you got a great electrician and you got a 5-year workmanship warranty, just let the workmanship warranty cover everything for the first 5 years. And then as you need support, schedule time with an electrician as it comes, because solar does sort of kind of take care of itself after a while. The second level of support is to pay a third party to monitor. We have one group who will just monitor it. And if there's an issue, they'll report it. They'll support you on a certain level. And then there's a third group, Omnidian. They offer insurance, and they will guarantee for, under a penny per kilowatt hour, they'll guarantee 100% of components, 100% of O&M, they'll guarantee 95% generation. So that's a real interesting service. It costs a little bit of money, but to have somebody who will 100%, similar to a standard insurance product, cover your system, that's part of my pitch. Different customers, they all have their different tastes. Some people are more hands-on. They have a local electrician who does things for them. They're not so worried about it, but others are. Everybody has their own little flavor. So I make sure to present multiple solutions for O&M, and I have great partners who have a big team out there already doing it. And I'm lucky that I have those people, because it gives me a lot of confidence when customers ask me that question. Hey, how do you take care of it? Well, here's what our plan is, and just have a nice clean document. So it's a good piece. And that's why that, O&M matters. People care about O&M. Business owners care about O&M. They have to fix things all the time. Business owners know things break. That's called reality. And, entropy is real. And so that paper was exciting to see. Now I can give customers a nice clean document and say, look, here's some projections of O&M costs. Your project, just like every other one, is different. It's a unique butterfly. So, whatever happens, happens. But here's some projections. And having service on the back end to cover those projections gives you a nice, round, safe project to offer somebody. So I like it. I like that document. Good job, NREL. Thank you, NREL.
Great. Moving on.
Yep.
The Biden campaign has announced a climate plan, right, in collaboration with the Sanders campaign. Julian Spector wrote about it at GTM. I could show that. Do you have a story that you like that talks about this?
Well, I don't have a specific story, because first off, I always want to share anything that Julian Spector writes. So I'm not gonna take away from any screen time of his. So if you got a Julian story to share, we're sharing that one.
Yeah, here we go. Can the clean energy industry deliver on the Biden-Sanders climate plan? And it links to the white paper that the Biden campaign has released. I mean, the thing that stands out about this for me is they're calling for carbon-free power grid by 2035, which is jiving with the 2035 report that I mentioned last week. I've also done a podcast with Grid Lab on the subject. They were a collaborator on that report, where there's very credible information now that we can absolutely achieve a clean power grid powered by wind, solar, and battery storage, doing 90% of the production, right? And then the other 10% from natural gas, nuclear, hydro, but 90% from wind, solar, and storage. And of course, that's going to greatly reduce our carbon footprint. Not as much as I thought. The grid is responsible for, 18% or something like that of our carbon emissions. So it's an important thing to decarbonize, but it's not the holy grail either.
But I will note, though, the reason it's down to 18% is because we've been transitioning coal to gas, and we've been deploying huge volumes of wind and solar. So it's, it used to be that the grid was the largest creator of CO2, of emissions in the United States, but that's evolved. That's definitely gotten better. So we've worked hard at it. And so to hear 18%, wow, that's a number. I mean, it's still a number. It's a lot of volume to knock, but we've done some good job. Some research I've done elsewhere, from a net standpoint, we've built no new fossils in the United States since about 2005. We've only replaced capacity, and it's gone up and down every year. Actually, last year might have been a year that we actually added a little bit new fossils. But, going back to 2005, when you add the retirements and you add the new gas, and there's really been no new coal for all practical purposes, all the new volume has been wind and solar since 2005. So that's something not trivial at all, in my opinion. So
yeah, what Americans don't understand is that you can talk about clean coal and bringing back coal all you want, but it's an economic decision that utilities make. They can't build new coal facilities or upgrade existing coal facilities for less than they can produce new wind and solar. And so new wind and solar are 70 to 80% of the new power generation period, simply because of economics. And you just can't argue with that. This is a capitalist society, right? We run on all these decisions that we make about infrastructure come down to the bottom line. And I'm a proponent of that. I'm a huge fan of capitalism, but we have to also then create policies like a just transition. When we're laying off hundreds or thousands of workers from dirty coal facilities, we need to help prop up that industry a little bit with some job training, special job training, for example, to help those workers segue. And they totally can. If you have the wherewithal to be a coal miner, you have the wherewithal to be a solar installer. It's not rocket science. I'm not a fan of some of these pie in the sky, go to school and become a coder. Not everybody can become a coder, but if you have a strong pair of arms and shoulders and legs, there's a lot of work for you in the wind and solar industries, or wind, solar, and storage. Anything else you want to say about the Biden plan, to your knowledge?
Well, there's two pieces of it that I really closely paid attention to. One is the clean electricity by 2035. I mean, that's a huge volume of capacity that would have to be deployed to meet those goals. I think you mentioned earlier the 2035 plan specifically was in the 60, 70, 80 gigawatts per year deployed. This year, last year was a record year. This year is going to be a record year, and we're going to be like 30 gigawatts, 40 gigawatts deployed. So we'd have to double our record year, which will be this year probably, without a doubt. And we'd have to double it, and we'd have to do it for a decade, 15 years straight, or, get to it. That's a lot of capacity. That's some job security if you're competent at this career of ours. So that was the big thing that I really noticed, just the speed at which they wanted to get to a clean power grid. 2035. That's close.
70 gigawatts of new wind and solar per year is what the 2035 report, which is, and that's the URL for anybody who wants to check that out, 2035report.org. And then the other thing in the Biden plan is about net zero emissions for new buildings. Do you remember what the goal was there?
Yeah, so starting in 2030, all new structures would be net zero. And this, to a degree, parallels what's going on in California. Just this year, California started their net zero residential market. And a key piece of the net zero residential is the solar component. You can be as efficient as you want, but you still got to get clean electricity from somewhere. So Cali said for every apartment you build or every house you build, you got to have 3 to 5 kW of solar installed and a whole bunch of efficiency. By 2025, California makes that 100% of government structures. And then by 2030, California suggests they're going to move it to all commercial structures. So in that sense, it might be that Biden and Sanders are looking to California guidance for how to structure this. Because, if all buildings suddenly are net zero, first off, that means they got to be getting that clean energy somewhere. Some of it's going to be on site. So rooftop, that's going to be great. That means there's going to be a lot of new efficiency. But it's always going to be a little slower than we think because new construction is, it's of course not as big as old construction. It takes us 50 years to rebuild all of our buildings, 100 years to replace our building stock. So, it'll roll out. It'll make an effect by 2045. In the long term, it will absolutely have an effect.
Yeah. I think buildings account for something like 40% of carbon emissions. So it's a big chunk of our carbon footprint that the built environment emits. And so converting new construction to net zero, we already have the technology. That's the thing. You can totally do a net zero construction, whether it's residential, small commercial, large commercial. We have the tech. And so we just have to put a stake in the ground and do what California's doing and saying, if you want to build a new residential building in California, you're going to put solar on it. And we're going to do that with these net zero standards. There's so many organizations now dedicated to net zero standards. I've talked with some of them here on the podcast, but when you Google net zero construction, there's just a plethora of resources. So any architect, designer, builder, engineer, worth their salt will be able to do this. Should we do another story? What else is on your blog, John?
Well, I do of course have customers to go chase down and have conversations with, but I did cover one other item over the last week, and that was about Massachusetts itself pushing toward 100% clean energy. And, Massachusetts is, in my opinion, they're kind of like the East Coast version of California. Coming from Florida, which is my original, where I cut my teeth doing solar for my first decade of my career, we had very little incentives. We have net metering, and then we have an occasional incentive to support solar with some kind of dollar amount back. But there's no statewide legislation. And so in Mass, though, they're pushing hard in many different ways. And right now, there's a push to get the whole state to take on both clean electricity and clean energy. Already, the state has a goal to get emissions down 80% by 2050. Last year, as I can see you have it up on the screen, they said net zero emissions by 2050 was the new goal, 100% net zero emissions. In 2017, they said 80% clean electricity by 2050. That was actually an upgrade from the prior plan, which was 1 to 2% per year. And so now they're looking to bring that even further forward. And one piece of legislation that I covered in this article that was submitted, and it's not signed, it's just, there's multiple pieces that have been submitted. It's looking for 100% clean electricity by 2035, which actually aligns with the Biden-Sanders plan, and then 100% clean energy by 2045. And that 100% clean energy now aligns with net zero goals in the state really closely. And so I thought that was real interesting. But then there's another layer, and that layer is coming from the Attorney General's office. Attorney General Maura Healey, first off, she's awesome. She works real hard at her job. I love the work that that the Attorney General's office is doing. They're working aggressively on the Exxon campaign to really show explicitly in a legal perspective what Exxon knew, how long ago they knew it, the 1960s, no doubt they knew in the 1970s, and then who they were talking about this to, and how were they talking about it? Did they know in the labs that climate change was real, and are they saying one thing in the lobbying offices the next day? So she's working to do that. And with that, a couple of weeks ago, she put out a new document that is to analyze the state's drawdown of natural gas. Because effectively, if there's coal in the state, it's one plant at most, two plants at most. They're industrial plants, they're small plants, they're not trivial, but they're trivial. What's next, though, is gas. And first off, we're in the Northeast, so we need a lot of heating. We burn a lot of gas. And we have to burn electricity still. A lot of gas comes from electricity. And so we have to figure that out. And the Attorney General said, listen, we now have a law saying that we're going to have to be at net zero. There's others pushing for clean electricity. So with that, we need to orderly get rid of natural gas. We can't just say, oh, we'll get rid of it. So this is the Attorney General grabbing it, going at it, and saying, okay, how are we going to draw down the gas? And that just makes it so much realer. A lot of people say, we got these pie in the sky documents. Great. Now do it. Well, there's a difference. A politician can sign a document, but then the utility commission has to deploy the document. Then the engineers have to design it. Then the people in the state have to do the work. And this is seeing the sausage making. This is laying the framework to make this happen. And so that's what caught me. I'm just reading, there's constant news coming out of Mass, different programs, the SMART program, energy storage program, the Clean Peak Standard, thing after thing after thing, local green communities. I mean, they just keep popping off my head. And that's even before we talk about the multiple gigawatts of offshore wind. But, this is a document coming from a different direction, not about building the resources, but about how we're going to tear them down. And, it's just a good document to read, to see the perspectives on those who know how the law works. And Attorney General Healey, I like the work that they're doing. So those things combine well. I thought it was an important article to put out to the Massachusetts community.
Good stuff. Every state in the U.S. needs to be figuring out how to do this. And there are over 100 cities and states that have put a stake in the ground to be 100% renewable powered. So, well, I wanted to talk about FERC Order 841, but we're out of time. I need to move on with my day. So I want to encourage our listeners to check out our website, and we do pre-registered, pre-announced events. I'm going to share my screen so our listeners can check this out. And this month, we're having Julian Spector. I mentioned him earlier. He is a great journalist with GTM, that's Green Tech Media. And Julian and I are going to continue the discussion about the 90% clean grid by 2035. So if you go to cesnrg.com/podcast, you can register for that. When you click on register, it takes you to a real simple form, and away you go. The other thing is to note that you can find all of this content on YouTube. So go to YouTube, search on SolarWorks for Illinois, or my name, Tim Montague, or my co-host here, John Weaver, commercial solar guy, and you will find the podcast. Please subscribe, give it a thumbs up, make comments. That helps tremendously. If you comment, the algorithm, the robot behind YouTube really likes it when people comment on content. I think a lot of people don't understand this, John. No matter the platform you're on, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, it's comments, it's sharing, it's liking, of course, that are going to get these things noticed. And so together we are building the solar snowball and getting the news out about how commercial industrial solar makes a difference for you, the facility owner, and for us, the citizens of the United States, the citizens and residents of the United States. Well, thanks. We've finished episode 2, John. I really appreciate your time and energy and interest. Any parting thoughts?
There's a lot going on out there. A lot of programs, a lot of, just different structures. If you have questions, please, make a phone call to your solar people and ask those questions. Tim, if you're in Illinois, me, if you're in the Northeast, and, let us walk you through some of these things. Being in this industry for a decade, there's just so many nuances. And there's a reason that there are now millions of installations across the United States. We're more than 2 million installations. So, call us. There's a lot to chat through it.
Well, there you have it, the Clean Power Hour with Tim Montague and John Weaver. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks.